Hello and welcome on back. Today I'm going to talk about a topic I really enjoy talking about, and it's a very exciting topic. It's a topic that is becoming a bigger and bigger part of our commerce. It's becoming a greater concern for brand managers, and it's a topic that has very, very high stakes for all of the actors involved, and that's gray markets. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about gray markets. So, I always believe the first thing we should probably do is define what we're talking about. So what is a gray market? Well, a gray market is a good which has been diverted from the marketplace or the channel for which it was otherwise intended. So it's something that shows up someplace it wasn't supposed to. Okay, there's a lot of different types of gray markets, but basically a gray market good is a good that is where it wasn't supposed to be. So it was meant for China, but it's showing up in India. It was meant for the Philippines, but it's showing up in Myanmar. Whatever it is, the good was intended from one marketplace and showed up in another. It might have been intended for Marks and Spencer, but it shows up in the mom and pop store or the Kirana store or the Sari Sari store. So it's the sort of thing that a gray market is just that. It's a good which has been diverted from the market or the channel for which it was otherwise intended. Now, look, when do we see gray markets? Okay, or why do we see them and when do we see them? Well, the reason why you see a gray market is largely because there's money to be made. People start to move goods from one market to another. They buy in one market, sell in another market. They buy in one channel, sell it in another channel. When? When there's money to be made. Now, when is that? Well, first of all, when the product is very well known, and therefore it doesn't require a lot of selling expertise or selling effort. So whenever I can buy a well-known good, okay, a good that has a great brand name on it, that everybody knows the name, and therefore I don't have to do a lot of hard work to convince you about the features and properties and value and satisfying characteristics of this product. Instead, what I have is a branded product that everybody knows, and therefore it doesn't require a lot of effort. The second reason why we see it or see a gray market is because the price is very different in one market from another. Now, this could be because we've chosen to price at a higher price in one market versus another, or because of currency differences. Very often, as currencies begin to change, goods become cheap in one market, expensive in another market. Similarly, companies have different prices, as we talked about during our pricing section. Okay, companies have different prices for different markets. What you would charge in the United States might be quite a bit higher than what you would charge in Mexico. Similarly, what you might charge in the United States might be a great deal higher than you will charge in India or Cambodia or Laos. Okay, so depending on where you are, there might be very different prices. And when there are different prices in different markets, somebody has an incentive to buy in one market and sell in the other market. The third reason why we see gray markets is that the legitimate channel has added a lot of value. That is, the product is in demand, it's known, and people have a high value opinion of that good or that service. When people believe that the product has great value, they have a good, solid opinion of it, and therefore it doesn't require a lot of effort to sell, that's when the legitimate channel, right, the intended channel, has built value in the marketplace. Now, it's always easy at that point for somebody to trade in that good because the good sells itself, it's got a big margin, there's a big price difference. And that's usually when you see these gray marketers show up. Gray marketers are usually not the people that add a lot of value to your brands. They don't control your brand. You don't have a relationship with them. They're just people that are trading in your product, right? So these are the traders or the trading houses. They buy your goods and they sell your goods. All it is how much margin can they earn and how many units can they sell. But will they be the people that are going to stay around and do the servicing for you? Are they going to be the people that are going to build the market? Are they the ones that are going to go out and do the missionary sales to get people interested in your goods and services and convince them that your goods and services are wonderful with the idea that they'll make sales a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? No, these are not the kind of firms that are doing this. They don't have a relationship with the manufacturer. They don't have a contract that ensures that they'll always be able to get that product or that service. They haven't been tabbed to be a distributor. So this is the difference between a distributor. They have a relationship with the manufacturer. They have a contract with the manufacturer. They're the ones that are authorized to resell those goods in that marketplace. And a trader is somebody who just sees an opportunity, buys goods, and sells goods. Okay? So when we see gray markets, again, 3 reasons why we see them. The good is well known and easy to sell. Secondly, there's a big price or margin or currency difference between markets. And thirdly, we see it when the legitimate channel has added a lot of value. Now, why are we seeing gray markets? And why do I expect gray markets to continue to grow? And why have they grown so much in the last 20 years? Well, the first one is the internet. Today, we can find out about goods in one market or another. So we can see different prices around the world, and sometimes people spot opportunities and they buy in one marketplace and then sell in another marketplace. Look, the big national, international, multinational firms, they often have their own gray market operations, whereas they look at suppliers and look at suppliers around the world, and then they look for the products where they're at a discounted price, and they buy in those marketplaces and ship them into their stores in another market. So they have a tendency to buy across markets. And if there are market differences or market price differences, they're very much being encouraged to buy across markets. And the internet makes it very easy for us to spot those price differences or price irregularities in the marketplace. Secondly is, look, packing and logistics has become otherworldly these days. I mean, if I look at the number of patents that have been filed and I look at the progress that has been made in terms of how to package goods and also how to ship them, it's been an incredible journey that the logistics companies have been on for the last 30 years. We can virtually pack anything today and ship it. I mean, we ship consumer goods, the toys and electronics and things like this. But we're also now shipping agricultural products that we're able to pack them, ship them, and have fresh fruits get to somebody's home 2 days later using somebody like Federal Express or a DHL. Similarly, they're even shipping things like used medical waste. They're shipping bloodborne products. All of these things are now today being able to be packed safely, effectively, and then being able to be shipped. So what we're seeing is packaging and logistics has made it very easy for people to engage in gray markets. If you find goods, you've become aware of them, there's enough margin in them, you can pack them and you can ship them to where they're needed or required at a different price. The third thing is trading zones. Okay, the sovereignty between nations or the borders have become much more permeable. I grew up in my lifetime, I got to see the very first NAFTA agreement in the United States, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, where Canada, Mexico, and the United States all said that they would trade with each other with very limited tariffs, and most goods faced no tariffs. Well, this made the borders very, very easy, and things could shift or move across the different borders. Now, obviously, the United States has a purchasing power of about 6 times the average purchasing power of the average Mexican. So goods tend to cost more in the United States. What would happen is very often goods which were intended for the Mexican market, which were intended to be a little bit lower priced, okay, would wind up washing up over in the US market. And then to go on with trading zones, right? I mean, I'm talking about NAFTA, but Latin America also had Mercosur. We saw the euro come about in the late 1990s in Europe. We see ASEAN, AEC, all of these different trading zones do what? They kind of merge the world together. They make it a lot easier for us to be able to gray market or move goods from one market to another. And lastly is the consolidation within industries. Companies are consolidating. You have a lot of international and multinational takeovers where one firm buys another firm. And as they buy these firms, and they're buying across national boundaries and what have you, or they're buying across distribution channels, they become aware of different prices and different discounts for the products. Now, the thing to remember about gray markets is that largely a lot of it is driven, as I said a little bit earlier, by the opportunity for margins. Now, when we talked about pricing, I said that one of the things we try to do with pricing is we're trying to discriminate to different customers. If I know customer A over here, maybe they're in a geographic market, but customer A over here is willing to pay $10, but customer B is in a different country, in a different marketplace, and they don't have the purchasing power and they're only willing to pay $3, well, what am I going to try to do? Of course, as a rational, profit-seeking organization, I try to sell at $10 in this market and I try to sell at $3 in that market. The problem is when the $3 product starts shipping over into the $10 marketplace. Look, the same thing happens with different distribution channels. I remember a good friend of mine is an orthopedic surgeon. And he's one of these guys, he's a great guy, but every time you're with him, he's got a project to do. He just can't stay unbusy. So one day he says, come on. He says, I need some help. Let's go to the hardware store. I need to go buy some nuts and bolts. And what he was doing is he was trying to put a deck on the back porch of his home. So he was trying to build a deck that weekend. So I said, okay, great. And so, we're good friends, been friends for years. And so I go to the hardware store with him. Well, he got lost in the aisle with the nuts and the screws, right? And all of a sudden I come down the aisle and he's looking and he's got this screw about this long. And he says, this is the exact same screw that I put in somebody's knee the other day when I was doing surgery. And he says, look at this. This screw is 7 cents here. Over at the hospital, I charge $6 for this. Okay, now, I had to convince him, don't buy your screws over here, that there may be some other things going on, that the sanitization and the cleaning and all of the kind of things that you need for a surgery. But in talking to him, you really recognize that different markets or different channels often have very different prices for the same product. They have a different use for it. When you're putting your deck together, how much would you pay for a screw? Okay, when you're putting a knee back into somebody's body and making sure that those joints and tissue reattach, you might be willing to pay a different price. Okay, so just keep in mind that, gray markets always occur when what? There's a lot of margin out there. Okay, that they're driven in large part by the internet, by packaging, by these consolidation of trading zones, and by all of the firm mergers around the world. I remember when I started my career in distribution and started talking about distribution back in the early 1990s, it was estimated that about 80% of all consumer packaged goods, which we now call fast-moving consumer goods, but at the time we used CPG as the terminology. At that time, about 80% of the goods went through 2,800 customers. So the customers out there in the marketplace, there were about 2,800 retail and wholesale firms that bought about 80% of the consumer products. Okay. Today, if I talk to a Unilever or I talk to a Procter & Gamble, they'll tell you that their top 100 accounts worldwide might represent 70% of their business. So what's happened? Okay, the retailers, the distributors, they've gotten bigger, they've consolidated. And they engage in these gray markets. They buy across borders if they can. And if they see a different price in two different regions, they're either going to buy and ship, or what they're going to do is demand that lower price. Now look, there's 3 types of gray markets. The first is what we call an international distribution diverter, okay, often called an IDD, okay? An international distribution diverter says that, look, if the price is different in Indonesia than the price in Singapore, and the price is higher in Singapore than it is in Indonesia, what I do is I buy in Indonesia, ship the goods over to Singapore, and try to sell it in Singapore. Okay, this is international distribution diversion. Domestic distribution diversion is when it was intended for one channel or one distribution partner, but is showing up in a different distribution partner's warehouses or on their shelves. So it may have been intended for an upscale department store, but now it's showing up in a convenience store or a grocery store. And the third one is what we call a reseller position change. Now, what is an RPC, or a reseller position change? Very often, there's different discounts given to the different levels of a distribution channel. We might say that wholesalers, we give them a 25% margin. Retailers, we give them a 15% margin. Okay? Now, if I'm a retailer and I know that my margin's 15%, what might I do? I might go to a series of other retailers and say, hey, how much product do you want? How much do you want? How much do you want? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent myself as a wholesaler. Take the 25% discount and then go to all of the other retailers and offer it to them with a 20% discount. I keep 5% for myself, okay, but I give a 5% greater margin to the distribution channel or to the other retailers. This is when I've changed my position. I'm no longer behaving like a retailer. What I'm doing is I'm behaving like a wholesaler. Okay, similarly, what happens very often is when there's big price volume discounts. Retailers, if you were to say to a computer reseller, if you buy 100 units, you pay list. If you buy 200, we give you a 20% discount. If you buy 300 units, we give you a 40% discount. Now, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to get smart enough to go out, and what they're going to do is talk to all of the other retailers of computers, take their orders, give them a 25% discount, and then they're going to take a 40% discount. So they change their position from being a value-added, consumer-based reseller to being a distributor or to being a wholesaler of goods. Okay? So these are the three types of gray markets that we see. Now look, all of them have elements of each other. Could a reseller position changer be selling across international borders? Sure. Is a domestic distribution diverter, could they also be a reseller position changer? Sure. Okay, there's a lot of overlap with these, but it's important that you recognize these tend to be the three areas from which these things emanate. Now, if I look at gray markets, who are they driven by? Well, most of the time it's driven by the trade, right? Is that somebody in the trade is looking to make a profit. They see a market opportunity, and what they want to do is they want to free ride off of the value that was created by the legitimate channel, right? That the legitimate channel, the contracted channel, the channel that we're doing business with, has created a product that everybody wants, and what they want to do is they want to trade in those products and make margin. They know it's easy. They're basically free riding off of the reputation that was built and the value that was built. They see a market opportunity, okay? And they're looking for that profit. But sometimes manufacturers actually drive their own gray markets. Okay, they actually are the ones looking to enter markets, but they don't really want to make a footprint in those markets. So let me give you an example of this. Sometimes they will appear to be complacent in their endorsement of the gray market. Like, let me give you an example. I had a PhD student once upon a time who was doing his doctoral dissertation in Thailand, and he was studying gray markets. And he started to look at the biggest retail outlets in the entire country. And guess where those outlets were? They were in Nong Khai, Thailand. Now, Nong Khai, Thailand, why would that be where the biggest store is in Thailand? Okay, if I'm looking at somebody like Tesco or the Big C, why would they have their biggest store in a small, what you would call tier 2 town like Nong Khai, Thailand? Well, Nong Khai has a population of a couple of million people, so it's not a small city, but it's also right on the border between Thailand and Laos. And Laos doesn't have a lot of retailing. Okay, the retailing laws, the legal situation in Laos, the foreign direct investment tends to be very, very low in Laos. But Vientiane happens to be the biggest city in all of Laos. So what was happening, okay, is that retailer was opening that store with the idea of serving the Nong Khai market, but also serving the Laotian market on the other side. Okay, is that a gray market? Sure, it was a gray market. People were buying goods that were intended for Thailand that are now winding up being consumed over in Laos. Okay, that's the definition of a of a gray market. Now, it was driven by partially the manufacturer. They know what's going on. They know that that was happening. It's also being driven by the retailer. Okay, sometimes it's neglect, but sometimes it's proactive. They know it, they understand it, and they encourage it. Okay? Now, some of the goods that we often see gray markets traded in, okay, is things like tobacco. Okay, now tobacco, the price of a cigarette or the price of tobacco in the United States might be a great deal higher than it is in Honduras or in Venezuela or something like this. So what happens is the government, or excuse me, the cigarette company takes and they put a carton of cigarettes or a pallet full of cigarettes or a cargo vessel full of cigarettes, and they put them all on the back of the boat and they send the boat out to go to Venezuela. What happens is the boat goes out, it goes past the international boundaries 12 miles out, and then what happens is the boat turns around and comes back into the US market. Now, look, the cost of those cigarettes or the price that PMI, Philip Morris, or J.R. Reynolds Tobacco / Imperial Tobacco / whoever, they were selling it in the US market for a very high price, but also a very low price down to Venezuela. Now those goods come back into the United States and they are what we would call a gray market good. Now, here's a very, very important distinction. Gray market goods are quasi-legal. That means they tend to be legal goods. Now, at this point, there's nothing wrong with those cigarettes. Those cigarettes were manufactured in the United States. They were under the Food and Drug Administration rules in the United States. They were intended for Venezuela, but they come back in the United States. Now, they're a lot cheaper, okay, because of the price that they were sold out the door. Now, in a cigarette, okay, roughly 80 to 85% of a cigarette price is government taxes. Now, the taxes in the United States on a pack of cigarettes are very, very high. Same with most of Europe. Very, very high prices for cigarettes in these countries. They want to reduce people's consumption or to pay the medical costs of those people consuming those cigarettes, so they charge very, very high taxes. So on a $10 pack of cigarettes, it may be $8.50 is the cost of taxes.